Welcome to the Menttium Matters podcast, where we talk about leadership, life, and the transformative power of mentoring. I'm Solveig Brown, and today I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Dell Birch. We are going to discuss how to navigate the current business environment. Dell will walk us through what kind of thought leadership is required and the importance of managerial courage. Dell will also share his expertise on how to thrive during a merger and acquisition. Before we dig in, let me give you some background information on Dell. Dr. Delroy Birch is a visionary senior executive with over 20 years of experience leading global multi-industry organizations in their transformation, growth, and strategic initiatives. His expertise spans M&As, enterprise strategy, organizational design, operational excellence, and technology integration. Dr. Birch is a senior vice president of corporate strategy and technology operations in the automotive industry. He has a proven track record of scaling businesses, driving profitability, and leading large-scale acquisitions, integrations, and restructurings. Dr. Birch is adept at building high-performance teams, fostering innovation, and guiding cross-functional collaboration to achieve strategic goals in fast-paced and competitive markets. He is also the chairman of the board for a nonprofit that does global outreach. Dr. Birch has a PhD in organizational management and is an adjunct professor at DeVry University, where he teaches business technology, supply chain, and operations management courses. He has been a mentor for Menttium since 2010. Welcome, Dell. I am so happy to have you as a guest today.
Thank you, Sylvie. Always sharing my background makes me it humbles me a bit because I remember when I started as a mentee almost 2 decades ago.
Yeah,
Very
that
much
is a
my thoughts.
really
Yeah,
good perspective.
yeah.
Yeah, that is so true. Del, before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the idea for this episode came out of a conversation that you and I had. You told me that you were mentoring so many people right now who were just having a really challenging time navigating this environment. And you said Menttium needs to offer more resources for people to tap into. So I really appreciate when I came back to you and said, "Are you willing to share your expertise on these topics?" That you said, "Absolutely." So
Mhm.
thanks for kind of showing us the way on this one. So,
Absolutely, Sylvie. Absolutely.
yeah. So, Del, there is a new normal right now, which is characterized by uncertainty and ambiguity. Can you describe what you are seeing in this current environment?
Absolutely. What's interesting about this new normal, it neutralizes any bit of experience and any bit of education or background. And what I mean by that is to the point that you made when we first started talking about when I first posed the idea, Mentium needs to push out a lot more content because the new normal is different. People don't even know how to frame it. They're having a hard time articulating what it is, but they're feeling it. And people that I mentor within the Mentium population and ecosystem, and people that I mentor outside of the Mentium ecosystem, they're feeling the same way. They're all educated. The majority have MBAs, decades of experience, but they all still asking me the same questions, like, how do I navigate this thing, right? So, what I've seen across the last couple years, as far as the new normal, is really rooted in a couple things. And when I say what I've seen, it's not just in the role that I have in the auto industry, but I am a board advisor and a strategic advisor for multiple companies, pure technology, education, ed tech, smart manufacturing, and like you said, nonprofit. So this is coming from a place of seeing across a breadth of different industries and different phases of companies, whether early stage, late stage, or mature companies. So what I've seen in the new normal that's rooted in a couple things. One, it's the patience to allow people to figure things out has diminished tremendously, right? Any issue that a company has, whether it's at the department level, the AOR area responsibility level, the divisional level, or the company level, there's very little patience to get that thing changed, which puts professionals, especially in the middle layers of an organization, in a bit of a quandary. Why? Because over the last 5 to 7 years, there's been so much movement within the leadership ranks of an organization to just bridge the gap, right, of people holding roles. The level of development to handle ambiguity, to handle uncertainty, to handle just the evolving nature of a company in this global challenge has not been really sound. And that could be generally correct, but maybe for people who are listening, they say, well, that's not my corporation, right? So I understand there's a caveat to that. But the reason I'm saying that is um, most professionals, especially when you're at the prime in your career, whether you're in a leadership role or an individual contributor role, your ability to recognize those nuances and how to respond, how quickly to respond in a normal operating environment, you've given leverage and there's margin for you to be able to do that. Now, that's not there because companies have to act so quickly based on market pressures, industry pressures, financial pressures, equity pressures, whether it's from the board of directors, private ownership, VC, PE firms, that the patience to change and act on that change quickly has diminished. And that is sobering for a lot of professionals because if you have never been taught on how to navigate this environment, it is like starting a job brand new when you first began your career. So that's somewhat of the new normal I've been seeing over the last 2 to 3 years, Solveig. Um, and it's scary if you're not savvy on how to navigate it.
Yeah, that is an excellent description of the that people feel it. And then I like how you described that it is fast paced, not as much patience, decisions have to be made quickly, and everything that kind of was normal before is out the window. So people don't have the experience to navigate it and everything is speeded up.
Yeah.
So, what type of thought leadership is needed to be effective in this current environment?
Right? There's two anchor competencies that corporations use a lot and professionals use a lot. Like you said, thought leadership and critical thinking. And I had shared in a prior session we've had, and I've had with Menttium, where there's an intersection between critical thinking and thought leadership. That's the sweet spot for a very effective professional. And thought leadership at its core, it's around being able to recognize what is needed and leading yourself into it, or leading the team into acting upon it. And critical thinking is obviously looking at a situation that's presented to you from multiple different angles, right? There's never just one solution. Is to be able to recognize what you're feeling or seeing. How does it impact the company at the macro level, right? That mindset has to bleed throughout the organization, right? So the level of thought leadership and critical thinking for any professional, you have to position yourself as an owner operator or play a coach. You have to see yourself as an owner of the company, not just holding the role of director, senior manager, VP, senior VP, etc. You have to see, you have to, that thought leadership has to be rooted in, if this is my company, how would I make a decision? Which changes the entire paradigm of how you respond to any given situation.
Yeah, that is a huge mindset shift. I like that idea of just start thinking like you are the owner, the operator. One of the things that we've talked about too is the importance of, scenario planning or sensitivity analysis. Can you talk more about that?
Just to build upon what I just mentioned as far as that thought leadership and critical thinking and thinking like an owner, for any situation presented to you, and I'll give you let's just be transparent with what every company is facing right now, right? So every company is faced with market pressures because of the tariff and the recessionary impact, regardless if you provide a service or a product. Even your suppliers are feeling the pressure, right? So they have to account for the increase in prices of materials if you producing a product. So your suppliers have to account for it. And which means now they're passing their prices on to you, which means as a company, you have to pass your price on to your consumers, whether it's B2B, B2C, or direct to consumer. In addition, if you don't pass the price on to the consumer, now you have to absorb that burden and cost, which now means there are things you have to do internally to protect or preserve EBITDA so you don't hemorrhage that EBITDA for your shareholders, right? So that is an example of that owner mindset. Okay. Most professionals don't think through that. Now, from that point, as an example, from that point, the question now becomes, if I am a senior manager in charge of operations, if I'm a senior manager in charge of compliance, if I'm a senior manager in charge of finance, so if I'm a senior manager over sales, my mindset has to be based on what Dell just described. What are the range of possibilities on what to do next? So scenario planning and sensitivity analysis has to be rooted in a conservative approach, a best case approach, right? A worst case scenario. So you always have to look at a minimum of three different angles as to what are the next steps and what are potential outcomes of each of the next steps. And the reason I say that is because uh, back in the day, 2 to 3 years ago, prior to this new normal, it's okay to have ideas and ideation rooted in opinion, where you're faced with an issue. It's a lot of opinions. People give them freely. Well, hey, so I think we should be doing X, or I think we should just reduce commissions, or let's just cut back on T&E spend. Right? That's typically the easy answers to everything, but that only gets you so far. And if you think like an owner and you apply scenario analysis and sensitivity planning, right? A very conservative approach would be, there's a certain percentage margin in EBITDA that we have to preserve. So if I was to do the general stuff in maybe freeze hiring or cut back in travel and entertainment spend, that only gets me maybe about 6 months. So my annual run rate is X. Okay. What happens when I roll into next year? Because it's the second half of the calendar year. Could I sustain that run rate when I know my sales team has to continue to travel in order to land new business and preserve their current accounts? So even with that simple decision, that is not the most effective. It gets you a result for a period of time. So then what's a more aggressive scenario? What companies have done, especially in the tech space, is like, you know what, we're just going to cut costs. We're going to reduce our footprint in cost because we know revenue has been truncated. So we're just going to lay off a bunch of people. We're going to eliminate redundant roles. And we are actually going to reduce every discretionary spend known. And we'll figure it out at the end of the period that it's up. What that does is it reduces your footprint that you could roll into the next year. So it's a bit more aggressive versus the conservative, but there's something in between those two scenarios. As an example, that maybe two or three other options where it's maybe modularized, timing wise, or even used as a strategic footprint to maybe do some acquisitions that you could absorb that cost as part of the acquisition process through acquisitive growth, right? So that's the example that even at a manager, senior manager level, every professional needs to be thinking about that scenario analysis and sensitivity planning relative, buzzword in corporate, relative to what the challenges are being faced in the company. Now, historically, most professionals wouldn't think that way. Not that they don't know, they wouldn't think that way because the system around them within, especially larger corporations, allows you to somewhat stay in your swim lane. If you're in a smaller or medium-sized business, you usually wear 10 different hats. So maybe you might get that visibility. Hopefully that gives the illustration of not just the new norm, but the competencies that are required in the new norm, because the patience at the executive level to wait to solve an issue that's pressing is almost gone. The reason why I mentioned, and I love the question around scenario plan and sensitivity analysis, the reason I'm anchoring on those approaches and competencies is because if we were to have a conversation, Sylvie, about what we think should be needed to solve this financial crisis within our company or within our department, if I said, hey, Sylvie, in my opinion, I think we should be cutting, T&E spend. All you have to do is say, Dell, I disagree. And then my credibility is shot because it really depends on how much weight your voice has versus mine, how much relational equity you have in a business versus mine. That's how easy, but unwritten power influence is either diluted or leveraged. That's why sensitivity analysis and scenario planning is so key, because it removes any of that and focuses on the objective opinion. And if anyone was to say, well, I disagree with any of the 3 or 4 scenarios that you provide, great. Well, tell me what you recommend. The conversation is still moving the business forward.
Yeah, that is an excellent example of being expansive in the conversations and thinking of all angles, and then having everyone's voice matter in those types of
Yep.
meetings.
Yep.
So, Dell, in our prep call, you stated that managerial courage is needed more than ever right now. Can you say more about what you mean by managerial courage?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing about corporate, we have a good, and for everybody listening to the podcast, corporate folks, uh, you have a good way of slapping 2 words together and it sounds buzzworthy, and all of a sudden it becomes the thing. So, managerial courage was something that, really started taking off over the last 5, 7 years as far as a competency that's needed, right? It shows up in many ways: curiosity, asking a lot of questions, having fun. But managerial courage is the ability to take risk, whether calculated or uncalculated, and being willing to live with whatever the trade offs are, right? And the reason why that's so important in this new normal goes back to what I mentioned previously: the patience to wait for a problem to reveal itself and also be solved is diminishing, if not gone. And in times of uncertainty and change, what most professionals do, again, a generally correct statement, it could be specifically wrong or incorrect based on your personal situation. But what most professionals typically do is they kind of read the tea leaves and say, you know what, let me just hunker down, kind of be quiet, let this blow over, and eventually things will settle and I'll kind of get my foot in again and reestablish my presence. That's worked throughout history, with the exception of a couple key eras in business, this being one. Why? Because the default of just hunkering down, kind of putting your heads down and working, what that does is it puts you in a bucket of, hmm, not sure what this person is actually doing at the level that I'm paying them for. Are they adding any value that's helping us progress? And that's not an ignorant statement. And it's not a statement diminishing anyone's value or contribution to the organization. It's the mindset of the rapid decision making needed at the top, right? Which is why I indexed on the patience to solve problems is almost gone. So that's the quick deduction that happens. It's also the deduction where you make one mistake or you fail to act in a timely manner. Folks is like, they don't have what it takes to really operate in this environment. We need somebody with thick skin. We need somebody with grit. We need someone who could be a bias for action. Those are the conversations that are happening in boardrooms. Those are the conversations happening at the C-suite, the senior leadership level, the EMT levels. So managerial courage says, as a professional, it, even if it's at the department level, a team level, or your divisional level, it presented the opportunity of a challenge. I purport that you should take the opportunity to present some of the things I just mentioned in creating different scenarios, putting proposals together. The worst that could happen is folks could say, no, I kind of see it differently, but they at least see you making an attempt to have that mindset of, this is also my problem. I am trying to solve the problem, as opposed to waiting for leadership to solve the problem. There's not a leader out there that doesn't want some of that challenge to be taken off their plate by someone else who thinks that way. And without that managerial courage, being the person that says, I'm just going to hunker down, you become part of the current that has us where we are.
Yeah, and it's a great example of how you need to act differently now in this environment. And it's not necessarily how people have been used to be acting. Like you said, through history, putting your head down has been the way to go, but not right now. That's out the window. So, Dell, in your career, you have worked a lot with companies after they integrate. Can you share some best practices that people can do during a merger and acquisition, especially in terms of navigating the different macro and micro cultures when two organizations come together?
Yes. So I've been part of M&A I mean, you name it, I've been part of it in the big companies, the medium-sized, small businesses. As a matter of fact, the image right behind me right here, it's a Wall Street Journal article. I got myself in the picture after HP Enterprises bought EDS back in 2008. That was that was the second mega integration acquisition I was a part of, right? So back then I was doing M&A and integration activity. I was responsible for driving integration activities post that acquisition. I've also been part of mergers because acquisition is different than mergers. And even though, like again, like I said, we use terms and it becomes so saturated in our vernacular that we don't stop and think about what it actually means. What I mean by that, so big, is the majority of times it's an acquisition, not a merger.
Right.
Mergers, there's a different form of integration for mergers as opposed to an acquisition, even though the framework may be the same. So I'll speak primarily to acquisitions. I'll use the term M&A, but I'm indexing on acquisitions, right?
Mhm.
So if you are from an acquisition standpoint, there's two perspectives. If you're the acquiring company or if you are the acquired company, because there's a different approach to dealing with it. If you are the acquiring company, obviously, as part of the due diligence, you've gone through the rigor of assessing the need, the capabilities, the team structure, where there's synergies. If you absorb, do you need the existing team because you already have the foundation and the footprint in place? Do you have the infrastructure in place? So your perspective as the acquiring company, it's rooted in, hey, we've done this before. We're good at it. And we're going to just use our model. We're going to run our playbook. If this is your first time doing it as the acquiring company, you're open to suggestions, but you'll always index on what's worked for you. And for every professional, we do this by default. We may not necessarily articulate it this way. If it's worked for you to get you where you are, why would you change it? That's rooted at a personal level. And on the corporate level, it's the same thing. Okay. So as the acquiring company, there's a bias in we're going to run our playbook based on what we know have worked. What that does is it somewhat creates blind spots in the ability to understand or even appreciate what's also worked for the acquired company. And maybe that may be the best practice because the acquired company, there's not a reverse diligence done on the acquiring company. For example, when we go to an interview, even though they're interviewing us for a role, we're also interviewing them as the interaction. Do I want to work for that company? With M&A, especially in the acquisition side, the acquired company, the target or the asset, usually don't do a reverse diligence on the acquiring company because they're trying to get bought, right? So you're always at a point of a disadvantage subconsciously, even if you don't see that. Because you don't have the pure diligence done on the acquiring company, the acquiring company has the leverage to run the playbook and the framework, which creates a blind spot in recognizing best practices from the acquired company, which now helps me pivot to the acquired company. If any professional listening to this and you've been on the side of you've been acquired, your company has been acquired, there's a couple key things you need to know or need to act on immediately. First thing, you must spend the time to understand the cultural dynamics of the operating model of the acquiring company. If you don't spend the time to do that, there will be this hidden tension that you feel like you're fighting like almost every day. And what will be daunting to you is when the leadership team that were above you are naturally acquiescent to things that they've never done before. Your default will be, well, I don't respect them anymore because they're not making sound decisions. That's because they can't, right? Like, that's because they can't. They are now operating against a machine or a framework from the acquiring company based on the blind spots of diligence or based on the framework or operating model of diligence. So, as a professional in an acquired company, you have to do a couple things. Truly understand the cultural operating model of the company that just acquired you. And the cultural operating model could be based on what the CEO says. It could be based on how the company is engaged. I would say do your diligence, your personal diligence, and look at all the previous acquisitions, especially the most recent one that acquiring company has done. Look at the most recent acquisition and see what has occurred. See how long it took them to integrate, fully integrate. The reason I say that, Solvig, is when it comes to M&A, most companies could articulate, hey, it takes us about 12 to 18 months to integrate. That's usually at the macro level. But the ways of working, the culture, the norms, and the ways of operating relative to dealing with all the things we just talked about at the beginning of this podcast, that could take up to 5 years. So what I've seen occur is even after a company is quote unquote consider themselves integrated, if the acquiring company is saying, hey, look, this is what we need from you guys to be a bit more transparent with your financial reporting, to be a bit more open to change management and changing the dynamics. Like, for example, focusing on the sales side, maybe doing new territories on the sales front as we go to market. Sometimes the acquired company may say, well, we've never had to do that before. We don't even know how to do it. So what that does is it forces the acquired company to default to what they know, which may not go, it may not align with the acquiring company operating framework. And that tension seems like they're resistant. It could be rooted in, I just don't know how to do it. And I don't have a method of being able to learn how to do it, which feeds right back to the patience of, well, we promised the board that this was going to be done. You guys are not doing it, so I'm just going to replace the leaders and bring in a new leader. From an M&A standpoint, it's very common to replace key leadership roles. But every time you do that as part of an M&A, you're kicking the can down the road to reset the framework and operating model. Because every new leader that comes in wants to run her or his approach to leadership, which now you create multiple subcultures. That's the tension any employee at the acquired company or even the acquiring company may face. As a professional, especially if you're on the company being acquired, you now have to understand the leadership paradigm of the company, acquiring company. I've been in situations where the company I work for is the acquiring company, and our leadership paradigm is don't want to hear any excuses. See a problem, go fix the problem, address the problem, and come back to me with the results. I've been on the other side where, as the acquired company, you have a bias for action, and the acquiring company is like, slow your roll. Like, we don't operate that way. We need to be able to ready, aim, and then shoot, not ready, shoot, aim. All different permutations of those I've been a part of. So during an M&A, employees without the positional authority, the default, and been taught this across our careers, is to showcase that you are actually worth being around and a valuable asset. Contrary to what I said about managerial courage in an M&A, this is the time to be patient. You have to be patient. Every decision, every move as a professional needs to be calculated. It needs to be calculated in everything I just mentioned. Understanding the relational dynamics, understand the cultural norms, understand the political environment, understand the leadership decision paradigms, understand what's worked and what has not worked historically for any acquisitions that has occurred. Be able to speak to the challenges with acquisitions and integration. Be able to speak to the current blind spots that wasn't covered in diligence, and be able to speak to a level of business acumen that says, because it wasn't covered in diligence, here's how it burdens the rest of the business, which impacts EBITDA, impacts profitability, that owner's mindset, right? So I know that's a very long-winded answer, Sylvie, but I got a lot to say about this, and it's just rooted in pure experience.
That is a fantastic overview, Dell, and I can see that it's rooted in experience, and you've been able to describe it from so many different angles of all the different ways you have to do due diligence, all the different things to think about. I felt like I just had a crash course in M&A, so thank you so much.
Yeah.
Dell, we have time for one final question. What is your advice or words of wisdom for leaders right now?
That's a great question. Leaders need a lot of advice. Even though we're all leaders, leaders need a lot of advice because there's no cheat code for how to be an effective leader. Ultimately, the most important asset in every company is the employees. First of all, index on that. Secondarily, through experience, I joke a lot. One of these days, I'm going to write a book called 1,001 Things Not to Do in Business, because there's a number of companies I worked for that violated every one of them.
Uh-huh.
And myself, I violated a number of them throughout my career. For leaders in this new normal, so because we're talking about this new normal, what differentiates you as the ultimate leader of people, it's really applying the true servant leadership mindset and creating that margin. All the things that Menttium talks about, all the things and competencies that Menttium spends a tremendous amount of effort from yourself with these podcasts, the business education workshops, all the different programs that are available. I know it sounds like a public service announcement, but again, I was a mentee back in 2007, 2008. So I drink the Kool-Aid on this thing. Really anchoring on that content from a servant leadership standpoint, but even more importantly, just really providing the margin so people could have the time to do on the job development in this new norm, providing the psychological safety for them to feel like it's okay to fail. Because one of the things I've recognized across the companies I participate and engage with, so is there's this fear of failure because it may impact my job. And because of this new normal, where I forget who I was talking to just yesterday. They were telling me this like, Dell, you post for a job in LinkedIn now. And when you post for the job, you could see 1,000 more people have also applied. That's the marketplace. You're competing with 1,000 people for every job. This is nuts. Like, it's completely no. I don't remember a time when it's been that bad. The last time I remember was during the Great Financial Depression in 2008 to 2010 when the banking industry crashed, right? But outside of that period, I haven't seen one where the job market is that daunting. I've had to interview and hire a number of people over the last year, as recent as a month ago. And they told me, hey, look, I'm qualified, I'm talented. If you guys didn't find me, I've been sitting on the market for 4 months. These are not senior leaders, these are like first line managers. And the reason I say that is people are fearful to make a decision because they don't want to make a mistake. Because in their mind, whether it's truth or fiction or ghost, they believe that if I make a mistake, it could potentially lead to me being impacted in my role, and the market is not lucrative. So I rather just kind of hunker down and be average and deal with the junk, and then eventually this will blow away. And my challenge would be, how's that working for you? Because there's not a professional I haven't spoken to where they feel overworked, the pressure is heavy, there's a level of ambiguity in decision making, there's lack of clarity in what's next, there's pivot, and pivot some more almost every day, every other day, and their blood pressure's through the roof. Monday start, they can't wait till Friday. When they leave work, they check out. But the ghost of having to check your email, because if you don't check your email, you start the next day behind the eight ball. You don't know what people are talking about once you get off the conference call or you leave the meeting. Just this subconscious stress that is creating this anxiety and fear for the average professional, that if a leader has the ability to create margin to allow their people to try, fail fast, fail forward, but still grow through that learning, you set yourself apart as a leader that when you walk into a room, you change the atmosphere and people will be willing to give you over and above, as opposed to those leaders who are just looking to get stuff done from the employees, where people give you just what you ask for and nothing more.
That is a great example of the exponential impact of that kind of leadership and addressing the fears and anxiety of workers everywhere, which are real in this current environment. That anxiety is all the way throughout an organization.
I will
Um, y-
tell you, Sophie, one more thing.
yeah.
Even leaders have that anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even leaders. There are senior leaders at the C-suite level that I engage with that are also concerned for their jobs. Because the higher up you go, the less you have margin to make a mistake. So one bad decision could impact the companies financially, which means you're a risk. So you could be going quickly. And for most of the professionals in the Menttium ecosystem, I would not be surprised if almost 100% of them had said, man, we've had some significant leadership changes over the last 6, 12 months of my company. And it's rooted in those items. Even a leader not willing to act will be removed because action is needed.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes full circle. Action is needed, managerial courage, and just the new way of being in this environment. Dell, thank you so much for being my guest today. This has been such an enlightening conversation. I appreciate your suggestions that you've given for navigating this current environment, the importance of critical thinking, scenario planning. Thank you for walking us through how to shift your mindset to that owner operator mindset and take action based on that, giving multiple scenarios for your suggestions to create conversations and expanding conversations, and your suggestions for navigating an M&A from whichever perspective, whichever side you're on, are incredibly helpful. So I cannot thank you enough for sharing your expertise in all of these areas and for suggesting this episode. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, Sylvie. It's definitely been an honor to share what the little that I know.
Oh,
It's
I beg to differ. I say it's a lot, and I thank you. Thank you all for listening to this episode of the Menttium Matters podcast. We have many inspiring guests lined up, and we look forward to having you join us again next time.